Hello again everybody. So we're back in the garage, we're back on the subject of tyres, and today we're going to be talking about tyre pressures. I'll also be explaining a bit later on in the video why I don't reduce my tyre pressures for riding on snowy and icy roads when it's really cold. So there's two concepts you need to understand when it comes to tyre pressures. The first is how temperature affects the air in your tyres, and the second is how the pressure in your tyre affects the tyre itself. So the first of these concepts just involves some incredibly simple science. So air obviously is made out of molecules. As the air is subjected to heat, as the air is heated up, those molecules push further apart. Now obviously the air is trapped inside a tyre or possibly a tube, depending on what kind of bike you have. So as those molecules push outwards, they obviously push on the edges or sides of the tyre or tube and therefore increase the pressure. So basically, higher temperatures, more expansion of the air equals more pressure. There is a formula for that, basically. To put it simply, it's something like 0.16 psi of pressure gain per 1 degree Celsius. So for every 1 degree Celsius the temperature of the air inside the tyre increases, it increases the pressure by 0.16 psi. Only a small amount, but still makes a difference. So remember that, because we'll come back to that a little bit later, the concept of higher temperatures increasing the pressure. So obviously lower temperatures do the opposite. Lower temperatures will cause the molecules to get closer together, to bunch up, and that will decrease the amount of pressure in the tyre. Now, you'll notice this if you go check your car or bike tyre pressures in the cold when you haven't done it for a while. You might notice that your pressures are a couple of psi lower than they were the last time you checked. Sometimes it can be because the air's leaked somewhere, but most of the time no air's actually leaked out. It's actually just because where the air inside the tyre is colder, the pressure is less, because of the reasons I've just explained. So that's how temperature affects your tyre pressures. So what about the effect of pressure on the tyre itself? So let's just come around to this angle so I can sort of try and explain it. So if your tyres are inflated to the correct pressure, as per the manufacturer's recommendations, they will hold their shape nicely, they'll provide a good amount of grip, and they'll also provide a certain amount of shock absorption, because the tyres are actually part of the suspension system in a way. They actually absorb some of the bumps and shocks from the road. Obviously the suspension system itself does the bulk of the work in this, but the tyres are actually part of that system. So, as I say, correctly inflated tyres will hold their shape as they should, and that will basically make the bike, or car depending, handle as it should. Now, if you don't have enough pressure in your tyres, as in if you have underinflated tyres, or if the pressure has gone down because the temperatures have gone down, what will happen is the tyre will become softer. As you're riding along, it will deform. It will obviously create a larger contact patch, but the tyre will deform. Now, if you're only a few psi lower, that's not such a big problem. But if you're considerably lower, then the tyre can actually deform a bit too much, and that can cause issues with handling and can also cause a dangerous condition. Basically, if you've not got enough air in your tyres, the bike won't handle as it should and you can end up having an accident. Likewise, if you have too much pressure in your tyres, what will happen is it will decrease the contact patches and decrease the amount of contact you have with the road, and again that will negatively affect your handling and cause a dangerous situation. It also is dangerous because, going back to what I was saying about how an increase in heat can increase pressure, if you've already got too much pressure in your tyres before you start riding, and then you start riding, obviously those tyres are going to get hot as you're riding along, and you're going to end up with an even more pressure in your tyre, because when you first start your bike, before you actually start riding, your tyres are obviously a certain pressure, and then when you're riding along the road, they will actually warm up. So you will actually get an increase in pressure as you're riding along, which is why it's very important to inflate your tyres to the manufacturer's specifications and not more, because, as I say, you can cause yourself issues there. Now, at this point, it's worth noting that sometimes tyres do actually have stamped somewhere on them a tyre pressure. Mine don't, quite a few don't, but some of them do. Now, the tyre pressure that's stamped on the side of some tyres is not the pressure that you should actually inflate the tyre to. It's actually the maximum pressure that it can withstand before it actually explodes. So if you imagine if you were to inflate your tyre to that pressure, to that maximum pressure, and then go for a ride, and obviously the tyre then warms up and increases pressure even further, basically the tyre could explode underneath you, and that could be, well, quite devastating really. So as I say, it's important to inflate your tyres to the manufacturer's specification. Now, you'll find the specification in your user manual or the service manual. Sometimes on quite a few vehicles you'll find there's like a sticker or something somewhere. I've got one down here, don't know if you guys can see this, that shows the tyre pressures that you should inflate your tyres to. You can see on mine it says 18 psi. Sometimes the PSI or the pressure will be different depending on if you're carrying passengers or not. As you can see on my bike, it's just the same PSI regardless of what you're doing. But as I say, always inflate your tyres to the recommended pressure for what you're doing. So, with all that being said, there are some situations where you may want to change your tyre pressures. Now, generally speaking, if you're going to reduce your tyre pressures or anything like that, it's not recommended to change them more than a couple of psi, because you're gonna get some differences anyway. Or you're gonna have increases and decreases depending on temperature anyway. So if you're going to be riding in really soft, really thick snow, or if you're going to be riding on really stodgy, really muddy tracks, then yes, if you decrease your psi by a couple, or your pressure by a couple of psi, you can obviously increase the contact patch of the tyre and increase your grip. You don't want to do it too much though, because as I mentioned earlier, if you've got too low a pressure, it'll actually hurt your handling and won't do you any favours anyway. Now, the reason in the winter that I don't do that for riding on snowy and icy roads, because I know I've just said if you're going in like a really snowy field or something, decreasing your pressure slightly can be helpful. But when you're riding on the roads, even if the roads are completely covered in ice and snow and stuff like that, it's usually quite compacted and it's quite hard. So if you reduce your tyre pressure even a small amount and ride on a harder surface, then the tyre deforming can actually be more of a problem than the ice and snow itself. So you might think, okay, I'm going to ride on a snowy road, I'll reduce my tyre pressures. But as I say, by doing that, the tyre actually deforms a bit too much. So you're actually better off just sticking to the manufacturer's recommendations. Because the other thing to bear in mind is if you're riding around in the summer, you go for a ride in the summer, you're on the normal road surface, your tyres heat up more and the pressure increases more. But when you're riding out on the snow, you're going pretty slowly, so the tyres don't heat up as much anyway. And then on top of that, as soon as you stop, they cool down a lot quicker. So even running the manufacturer's recommendations, you are actually running at a lower pressure than you'd normally be in the summer driving at normal speeds anyway. So by reducing your tyre pressure before you even start, you're actually reducing it a bit too much. The pressure's already reduced just by nature of how you're riding in these conditions and that anyway. As I say, if you're going out in the snow, in the fields and stuff, that's a different story. But then you've got to bear in mind that if you do go out in the fields and reduce your tyre pressure, as soon as you come back out onto the roads, you're going to need to increase it again. So unless you've got a pump on you or something like that, generally it's just better, just to keep them at the correct pressure. With that being said as well, obviously I mentioned before, in the winter when it's colder, it's going to take more air to inflate your tyre to the correct pressure, because obviously it's become more dense, but it is still important to inflate your tyres to the recommended pressure, and keep an eye on them as well, because especially, you know, during the sort of spring and autumn and things like that, when the temperatures tend to fluctuate, it's important to check your tyres. I mean, really, from a safety point of view, you should check them almost every time you ride, or at least every other time. But as a general rule, at least if you use your bike on a regular basis, once a week at the very least, you should be checking your tyre pressures along with all your other standard safety checks. But yeah, as I say, guys, 9 times out of 10, for the majority of the riding you do, regardless of how cold it is or how snowy or icy it is, it's best to keep your tyre pressures at the manufacturer's recommendations. Only consider reducing them by a few psi if you're off-road riding, and I mean proper off-road riding, and you're not going to be going back out on the road. Or if you do happen to carry a pump with you and you're able to increase your tyre pressures again once you come off the dirt and onto the road, fair enough. But as I say, for the vast majority of riders and the vast majority of riding conditions, manufacturer's recommendations every single time. So there we go, guys. As I say, it was just a little video explaining about tyre pressures and, as I say, why I don't change mine. Hopefully you found this useful. If you did, please do give the video a like. Please do go check out my other videos on the channel. If you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel, and also, if you have time, go check out the Facebook page. We've got Twitter, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. Go have a look at those, and for now, I'll catch you again soon.